My husband plotted to abandon me for his mistress. He didn't expect that. I am Isabella Rodriguez, a woman who spent 12 full years building my marriage on a solid structure of reliability and competence. The kind women who were once single mothers learn through survival instinct, then carry into every role that follows without needing anyone's recognition. I created stability for my family through sheer will, personal discipline, and a quiet devotion that made me an indispensable pillar to everyone except the man who had silently decided I was entirely replaceable. At 37, I was already accustomed to the layered complications of modern married life, being a wife, a mother, caring for aging parents, carrying the invisible pressure of a woman who gets things done, and keeping an entire household running smoothly in a world that is always ready to punish women for having too many responsibilities beyond themselves. The suburban house where Richard, my husband, and I lived looked unremarkable from the outside. A standard home in a quiet neighborhood, neatly trimmed lawns, neighbors exchanging polite nods. But inside, it was where I coordinated everything, from the family budget, our 2 children's schedules, medical appointments for our parents, to small details like utility bills, insurance, tuition, and the unexpected expenses that always appeared just when the family thought it had finally stabilized. That life was not glamorous, but it was durable, and to me, durability always mattered more than appearances, especially because I understood the cost of everything collapsing when one link is treated as expendable. For 12 years, I was the invisible infrastructure that kept the family functioning smoothly, managing finances with near-mechanical precision, arranging schedules so no one was forgotten, balancing the children's needs with the gradual decline of elderly parents, and handling countless minor crises that, if left unresolved, would quickly turn into expensive disasters, both financially and emotionally. At work, I managed payroll with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, coordinated schedules across multiple departments, negotiated vendor contracts that saved the company thousands of dollars each year, and dealt with the endless crises and messes typical of any low-margin business with high employee turnover. I was the person everything was entrusted to, the one everyone leaned on when something needed to be handled and finished, with enough discretion to keep everything looking normal to the outside world. My husband, Richard Henley, as I later realized, was the kind of man who considered himself progressive for marrying a strong, independent woman while still holding on to outdated assumptions about power, gender, and roles in marriage. He called all women by overly familiar terms like sweetheart or kid, with the ease of someone who believed those words were affectionate rather than diminishing or inappropriate. And his definition of partnership was letting me carry most of the invisible labor while treating the stability I created as a given. He was accustomed to taking credit for a smooth life he did not actively maintain, and he viewed my devotion as a readily available resource that did not need protection or appreciation. We had both come out of failed relationships before finding each other, and Richard always wore an almost excessive cheerfulness, the calculated optimism of men who are practiced at disguising selfishness behind a smile. In marriage, he embodied a subtle form of toxicity that thrives where boundaries blur, where respect is replaced by habit, and where words are used to justify control. He was skilled at smiling while saying hurtful things, turning condescension into feedback, and making the women around him slowly feel grateful for being kept in his life. I accepted Richard's behavior for more than a decade, not because I failed to recognize it, but because I understood the cost of losing stability. I needed this marriage to keep a whole home for my children, to protect the care network I had carefully built for my family, and to avoid becoming a woman forced to start over, exactly the kind of woman who, having once been broken by marriage, fears being broken again. I learned to stay silent, to record everything in the dark green notebook I always carried, to protect myself with evidence and discipline, while maintaining the calm, capable exterior my husband constantly demanded. The first cracks in our marriage appeared in early spring, during that in-between season when winter's cold had begun to loosen its grip, but had not yet fully withdrawn from the city. At first, every change was subtle. The kind of slight misalignment people easily reassure themselves is just ordinary stress or the natural consequence of a long marriage. But the instincts I had honed over years of self-protection began registering patterns that slowly made me uneasy about my place within the very family I had worked so hard to hold together. Richard, who for 12 years had never once commented on how I managed spending or ran the household, suddenly developed an almost obsessive interest in every small detail of the family budget. He started sending me messages with cold subject lines like billing issue or about the budget, scrutinizing expenses he had previously accepted without question. The criticism felt deliberately constructed, as if he were searching for flaws in a place that had never been considered problematic before, in service of a purpose far beyond simple financial oversight. "I just want things to look a little more organized," Richard said one tense morning, leaning against the kitchen counter, gripping his coffee mug like a shield against my questions. His discomfort was obvious, but alongside it was the quiet resolve of someone trying to create a paper trail of issues that could later be used to justify decisions already made. "You seem a bit distracted lately, both with the family and at work, Isabella," he continued, his voice carrying the performative concern of someone rehearsing empathy they did not genuinely feel. "Maybe it's just stress, right, sweetheart? I know you've got a lot going on with the kids and everything." The way he invoked the children sounded like a warning wrapped in compassion, and I had heard enough variations of this argument over my lifetime to recognize it instantly. "Are you saying there's something wrong with how I do things?" I asked plainly, refusing to accept vague criticism that could not be addressed or discussed. "If there is, just say it." "No, not exactly," Richard replied quickly, waving his hand as if pushing away an uncomfortable truth. "Just a bit more polished, okay? Make things look reasonable." The conversation ended there, but it marked the beginning of a systematic campaign of erosion that escalated over the following weeks. Invitations to important meetings began disappearing from my calendar without explanation, forcing me to learn about key discussions indirectly from colleagues who assumed I had chosen not to attend. Project updates that had crossed my desk for 12 years were suddenly being handled by Hannah Evans, the newest member of the administrative team. Hannah was 26, fresh into adulthood, with the confidence that comes from never having to choose between paying rent and feeding a child. She was inseparable from her phone and glossy lipstick, entering Richard's life with an air of lightness and ease, treating every interaction as part of a carefully curated personal performance. More importantly, Hannah became Richard's shadow, accompanying him to work events, staying late for special projects, and giggling at his jokes with the calculated enthusiasm of someone who understands that advancement sometimes has less to do with competence and more to do with making powerful men feel admired and needed. "You're doing great," I overheard Richard tell Hannah one afternoon, his voice carrying a warmth and excitement I had not heard directed at me in a very long time. "You've got something very natural about you. People are drawn to it. The company needs young people like you." Hannah responded with a laugh loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, then said something that revealed more than she likely intended. "I'm just doing exactly what you told me to do. Smile, act eager, and make eye contact when I talk. Honestly, I didn't think I'd get noticed this fast." "You're not just getting noticed, Hannah," Richard said, lowering his voice into the intimate tone of someone sharing a secret. "You're moving up." That exchange confirmed what I had sensed, but was not yet ready to face. Hannah's growing presence in Richard's life had nothing to do with her skills or actual contributions, and everything to do with her willingness to participate in an unspoken arrangement Richard had quietly put in place, one where opportunity was not granted based on value, but on convenience and carefully disguised greed. Written reprimands began appearing in my personnel file with increasing frequency, each one documenting trivial mistakes that had never occurred in my previous 12 years of work. I received an official warning for arriving 2 minutes late after taking my son to school when he had a fever, despite the fact that I routinely stayed hours past closing time to complete projects assigned to me at the last minute. On another occasion, he criticized how I managed the household budget, claiming the spending plan was incomplete, even though I had full date and time records, archived receipts, and clear notes of the times he had nodded in approval without questions. That contradiction made me realize that either Richard no longer remembered what he himself had approved, or worse, he was deliberately distorting the truth to create the impression that I was making mistakes, a series of mistakes sufficient to justify diminishing my role within my own family. The most humiliating incident occurred during a team meeting when Richard announced that a complex vendor negotiation project had been successfully completed thanks to Hannah's coordination efforts. I sat there in stunned silence as months of relationship building, contract analysis, and cost-saving negotiations I had carried out were credited to someone who had contributed nothing beyond smiling and taking notes during calls I had organized and led. When I met Richard's eyes across the conference table, he did not flinch or show the slightest embarrassment over the misattribution. Instead, he lifted his coffee cup as if toasting and gestured toward the dessert plate as though it were a reward for my silence, for a harmonious family. On his face was the quiet satisfaction of a man who believed he was manipulating the situation flawlessly, that the truth could be rewritten simply by repeating a different story often enough. That evening, with Richard still not home, as the children worked on their homework, in the familiar corner of the kitchen, I held my phone and spoke to my mother during our usual end-of-day call. Saying out loud the things I had been suppressing for weeks brought a frightening clarity. The situation was not improving, and it would likely get worse before reaching any kind of resolution. "I think he's trying to push me out," I admitted, for the first time voicing what had been smoldering inside me. "He's still using everything I do, but he's giving all the credit to that young woman. I don't understand it. She has almost no experience, yet she's being praised and placed in a position that was always mine." My mother's reaction was immediate, sharp, and without hesitation. "After everything you've done for your husband, Isabella, that's not right. That's not fair. Watch every change." "I know," I replied, feeling a heavy certainty settle into my chest. "I can feel it. Something is very wrong, and I think things are about to get much worse." That instinct turned out to be accurate, and it arrived faster than either my mother or I had time to prepare for. The truth revealed itself on a Friday evening, right at the most chaotic and tense point in the work schedule, when everyone's patience was worn thin, and even the smallest misstep could trigger a cascade of consequences that were hard to undo. Richard had specifically asked me to stay late to finish reviewing the finances, using that familiar, flattering tone that once made me believe I was valued by him, but now left only a hollow sense of being used. "You're the only one who really knows how to put everything in order, Isabella," he said, offering a smile so thin it looked more like a grimace than gratitude. The remark sounded like an accidental confession, that he still needed my competence while simultaneously preparing to remove me from his life. That contradiction exposed the level of deceit and calculation I had previously tried not to name. I stayed anyway, despite having a dozen reasons to leave on time. "I'll take care of the kids, sweetheart," he said before I could give any excuse. When I finished the budget reconciliation, the entire office had sunk into a silence so deep that even the smallest sounds became unsettlingly clear, the ticking wall clock. I saved the carefully checked numbers, closed my notebook, tidied up, and hurried home, even though Richard had said he would handle the kids, because I knew that at home, the thing he cared about most was still his phone, and my daughter had a spelling test the next morning and needed someone to sit beside her and repeat each word. But when I returned to the house, everything was dark, with only the bedroom light on. I exhaled slowly and unlocked the door gently. Maybe I should trust Richard more. Maybe he had taken care of the children and put them to bed early. I moved quietly upstairs when I heard voices coming from our bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, the desk lamp casting a long strip of light across the floor, along with sounds that were unmistakably clear. My feet stopped, frozen, as if my body had made the decision before my mind could react. "Relax, sweetheart," Richard said, his voice smooth and familiar, the same tone he used after a few drinks at parties, when he believed he was completely in control. "Isabella will be gone next week. I've already started the divorce paperwork. Really, once she signs, that position, or the place beside me, can only be yours." The words struck me like a direct blow, tightening my chest and making my heart pound so hard I was sure the empty house could hear it. 12 years of building, countless sacrificed evenings, cold dinners, choosing family over myself, reduced to a casual conversation about removing and replacing me, both at work and in life, as if I were nothing more than an item past its expiration date. Hannah's voice followed, light and playful, with no hesitation or discomfort of someone clearly participating in a scheme. "You're sure she won't make a big deal out of it? After all, she's been with you a long time. Some people find it hard to let go." Richard's laugh was sharp and clipped, the laugh of a man who had never considered that the person he was manipulating might resist. "She's loyal, yes, and very predictable. Once she sees the money she's getting, she'll sign. Isabella isn't the type to stir trouble. She likes stability, and she's afraid of taking risks." The intimate sounds continued, but I had heard enough to understand exactly what was happening, and why the instincts that had refused to quiet for months had been right. I took out my phone, opened the recording app, drew in a deep breath, and turned back toward the hallway with the cold focus of someone who had finally identified the threat in front of her and was ready to defend herself with every tool she had. I would not confront them. That would only make them cautious and give them more time to adjust their plan. Instead, I would document everything, protect myself with evidence rather than emotion. I backed away slowly, carefully, as if afraid to make a single sound. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sharp betrayal that had just reached its limit, about to transform into something far more dangerous than Richard had ever imagined. In the days that followed, I continued living normally, but behind the scenes, I gathered every piece of evidence. Monday morning arrived with the false cheer typical of corporate environments, where unpleasant tasks are handled behind smiles and professional courtesy. I had just taken off my coat when Richard said he needed to talk, his tone brief and decisive, exactly like the times he had announced something important throughout our many years of marriage. "Now?" I asked, even though I already knew precisely where this conversation was headed. "Yeah," he replied, avoiding my eyes. "I think we should talk early." I knew Richard too well to believe this was a conversation born of genuine feeling, but I did appreciate that he wasn't dragging out the performance. All weekend, I had prepared myself for this moment, understanding that my reaction would not only determine the immediate outcome, but also shape every legal option I would have afterward. I walked into the office and sat across from him, immediately noticing how he had arranged the space like a formal negotiation rather than a conversation between spouses. His hands were placed neatly on a brown file folder, which undoubtedly contained the divorce papers and the severance he believed would be enough to purchase my silence and cooperation. "Isabella, sweetheart," Richard began, lowering his voice into the precise tone of manufactured empathy he always used when he was about to hurt someone. "This isn't easy for me, but I've decided to let you go from your position and have you focus on the family." He delivered the news without looking at me, his eyes fixed on the folder as if reading from a script, making the exchange feel detached and awkward. There was no genuine regret on his face, no acknowledgement of my contributions, no recognition of the consequences this decision would have for me and the children. Only the relief of someone who had just completed an unpleasant but necessary task for his own benefit. I said nothing. I didn't ask questions, didn't appear surprised, hurt, or angry. I simply let the silence stretch until Richard began shifting the folder, clearly unsettled by my composure, a reaction entirely opposite of what he had anticipated. "If you sign the termination papers today, the company will provide a $50,000 severance," Richard continued, opening the folder to reveal documents that were clearly prepared in advance. Of course, I want this to be voluntary. No conflict, no bad blood. It'll be better for our family. The offer was deeply insulting. He was having an affair, preparing to divorce me, yet using the excuse of what was best for the family to persuade me to leave my job. But what caught my attention even more was the phrase, no conflict. It exposed his real concern, avoiding consequences for what he had done, not fairness or respect for the woman who had stood beside him for more than a decade. Of course, Richard, I replied calmly, taking the pen he offered without hesitation or negotiation. My composure made him pause. He had clearly expected tears, arguments, or at least a barrage of questions about why. I signed each page without reading closely, my hand steady, my expression unchanged, revealing nothing to suggest that I understood exactly what game was being played, and that I had already begun executing a counter-strategy to expose his wrongdoing and protect my legal rights. Instead of going home to deal with the termination on my own, I took the elevator up to the 6th floor, where the Human Resources office sat behind frosted glass and inspirational posters promoting company values like integrity and respect, values that seemed to be applied selectively, depending on who violated them and who reported the violation. Lorraine Martinez, the HR director, was someone I had worked with for many years on personnel matters, policy enforcement, and the routine administrative issues that required coordination across departments. Lorraine had always been fair, though she maintained the cautious neutrality typical of HR professionals who understand that their primary loyalty is to the company, not to individual employees. "Can I have a minute?" I asked, knocking on Lorraine's office door with the confidence of someone handling a matter that needed resolution, not airing personal grievances. "Of course," Lorraine replied, immediately closing her laptop. I stepped inside and gently closed the door behind me, a gesture that instantly signaled the confidential nature of what I was about to discuss. "I'm here to report misconduct," I said plainly. "Discrimination, retaliation, sexual harassment, and possibly other violations that legal counsel will need to address. And yes, I have evidence." Lorraine's posture straightened immediately, her professional instincts recognizing the seriousness of the allegations and the potential legal exposure they posed to the company. "All right," she said carefully. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" I took my phone out of my purse and placed it on Lorraine's desk, like an exhibit in a criminal trial. I recorded a conversation between Richard, my husband, and Hannah on Friday night after work. I wasn't trying to spy on them, but when I heard them discussing my termination and replacement in my own bed, I recorded it to protect myself. Lorraine tapped the phone screen to play the recording. He promised her my desk, said she'd get a better chair with soft cushioning, told her he'd help her get promoted to a corner office within a few months. Lorraine's expression hardened as the implications of sexual harassment became unmistakable. The inappropriate promises of advancement painted a clear picture of quid pro quo harassment, creating legal liability for the company and grounds for potential criminal action against Richard personally. "And Hannah's response?" Lorraine asked. "She laughed," Isabella replied, her voice carrying more disappointment than anger. Like it was a private joke they'd shared before. She seemed to understand exactly what he was offering and what she was expected to give in return. Lorraine listened to the entire recording with the focused attention of someone who understood that every word carried legal risk and regulatory violations, capable of leading to significant financial penalties and reputational damage. When the recording ended, her lips pressed into a tight line, an expression common among HR professionals weighing the cost of litigation against the cost of settlement. "I need to escalate this immediately," Lorraine said, her voice heavy with the gravity of someone who understood how serious the situation was. "This recording, combined with your documented work history and the timing of your termination, shows a very clear pattern. What do you want from this process, Isabella? He is the father of your children, after all." I had spent the entire weekend thinking carefully about my options and priorities. I want my job back, with a promotion that accurately reflects my actual contributions over the past 12 years. I want compensation for the emotional harm and financial hardship caused by this discrimination. And I want assurances that Richard will never again be able to use his position to exploit or retaliate against other women under his authority. I'll be in touch very soon, Lorraine promised, reaching for her phone to begin the formal process, which would involve company legal counsel, senior management, and possibly external investigators depending on the extent of Richard's misconduct. I left the HR office feeling lighter than I had in months. The next stop was my lawyer's office. My attorney, Jessica Hayes, was a woman with many years of experience handling complex divorces involving financial manipulation, infidelity, and abuse of power within marriage. She carried the familiar composure of someone who had seen every form of betrayal, enough not to judge, but never to miss a detail that could become legal leverage. "What's your story?" she asked, in the tone of someone gathering facts, not emotions. "He said I'd be gone next week, that he'd already started divorce proceedings, and that once I signed the papers, everything would be settled," I answered slowly. "He called me predictable, said I wouldn't fight back, because I need stability too much to cause trouble." I paused, letting those words land where they belonged. "But the worst part is, he just fired me." Ms. Hayes's face hardened immediately. That statement, placed in the context of a husband preparing to divorce his wife for his mistress, while controlling finances and applying psychological pressure, went far beyond simple infidelity. It was evidence of coercion. "I'll move forward immediately," she said. "This recording, combined with the financial transactions, the timing of the divorce, and his threatening behavior, establishes a very clear pattern of manipulation and abuse within the marriage." "I understand," I replied. "I want every dollar he spent on his mistress recovered. I want custody of my children. I want compensation for the emotional and economic damage he caused." 3 days later, I was standing in the kitchen, preparing lunch for the children with near-mechanical precision, the kind of focus women who carry multiple roles at once are forced to cultivate, when my phone vibrated. Richard's name appeared on the screen. My heart sped up for a moment, even though I had anticipated some kind of explosive reaction ever since I submitted the evidence and initiated legal proceedings. "Isabella," Richard's voice came through the line the moment I answered, stripped of any pretense or courtesy, leaving only tightly coiled anger. "What the hell did you do?" "Richard," I replied, deliberately keeping my tone innocent, even though I knew exactly what had prompted the call. "What are you talking about? You went to a lawyer. They sent papers today and you even went to human resources?" His voice rose, completely out of control. "Do you think you're so smart? You think you can destroy me and just walk away? I'll make sure you don't have a single dollar left. I have connections, I have lawyers, and I will ruin you if it's the last thing I do." The threat was exactly what I expected, and it was also the final piece I needed. "Richard, stop," I said clearly. "This call is being recorded. What you just said constitutes a threat and retaliation, and that is illegal." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I briefly wondered if the call had dropped. I could picture the exact moment he realized that his outburst had just pushed him into yet another legal trap, another piece of evidence that could be used against him in both the divorce and the proceedings involving custody and assets. "And if I receive any further threats from you, verbally, through actions, or through anyone else, I will continue taking whatever steps are necessary," I added, my voice calm but firm. "I will do everything required to ensure my children's safety and my own." Richard hung up without another word. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, feeling a wave of mixed emotions wash over me. There was relief in knowing I was no longer passive in the face of abuse of power and control. But there was also a bitter sadness, as I realized that our 12-year marriage had likely always been built on his assumption that I was too dependent, too weak to fight back, when he chose to betray me and trample my boundaries. I finished packing my daughter's lunch, my hands steady, slipping a small note into the box that read, "You've got this. Mom loves you." Then I moved on to the next item on the familiar morning list. The crisis was now in the hands of people with the authority and responsibility to handle it. My role was to keep my children's lives as undisturbed as possible, while the adults faced the consequences of their choices. That afternoon, while I was reviewing resumes and weighing my options in case the HR investigation did not result in reinstatement, Lorraine called with news that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. "Isabella," Lorraine said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had resolved a difficult situation in the direction of justice, rather than short-term convenience. "I wanted to update you on the investigation. Richard has been terminated, effective immediately. The recording you provided, combined with his documented work history, made the decision very clear." I sat down at the kitchen table, feeling something in my chest finally loosen. "And Hannah?" "Hannah has also been terminated," Lorraine explained. When confronted with the evidence, she admitted to the inappropriate relationship and confirmed that Richard had promised to help advance her career in exchange for personal favors. She chose to cooperate rather than risk this situation affecting her future employment. In return, the company agreed to a quiet separation and a neutral reference letter. The news was better than I had dared to hope. Not only was Richard being held accountable for his misconduct, but Hannah was also facing consequences for her participation in a scheme that had nearly destroyed my career. "We would like to offer you your former position back," Lorraine continued. "In fact, more than that. We want to promote you to Senior Operations Coordinator, with higher pay and expanded responsibilities that accurately reflect your actual contributions to the company. We are also implementing a flexible work schedule so you can manage family obligations without compromising your professional standing." The promotion was recognition of 12 years of effort, an acknowledgement of my competence and dedication. The flexible schedule addressed one of the fundamental challenges working mothers face, being forced to choose between their children's needs and career advancement because employers refuse to accommodate the realities of family responsibility. When the call ended, I sat quietly for a long while in the still kitchen. Everything was not fully over yet, but for the first time since the marriage began to fracture, I knew one thing for certain: the power no longer rested with the person who betrayed me. I had taken it back, step by step, with clarity, evidence, and the resolve to protect what truly mattered. When I returned to the office the following week, I was an entirely different person from the one who had been escorted out with a box of personal belongings. I was now a Senior Operations Coordinator with a salary that accurately reflected my true value to the company, an office with better light and windows, and the authority to implement changes that improved working conditions for everyone rather than serving only management's convenience. Hannah's desk was empty, her personal items cleared away, the space waiting for someone who would earn advancement through competence instead of personal favor. Richard's nameplate had been replaced with a temporary sign indicating the position was under restructuring, perhaps to prevent another individual from accumulating the kind of unchecked power that had enabled systemic discrimination and harassment. "Welcome back, Isabella," Lorraine said, greeting me at the elevator with a small basket of coffee and snacks, an expression of genuine appreciation rather than the reluctant acknowledgement I had known in previous roles. My marriage, meanwhile, did not end with applause or any celebratory moment, but with very ordinary mornings where I stood in a quiet kitchen, brewing coffee a little more slowly, listening to the sound of boiling water instead of my heart racing as it once had. My lawyer worked quietly and precisely, using every recording, every number, every timeline to negotiate a settlement in which I did not have to beg for anything. I simply reclaimed what had always been mine: the majority of the marital assets, custody of my children, and support sufficient to ensure I no longer calculated each bill in fear. Richard was investigated internally for the inappropriate relationship he once believed was secret. Doors that had opened because of power closed quickly once light was directed at them. Hannah disappeared from his life the same way she had entered it, loudly and in a rush. leaving behind whispers and a reputation no longer intact. There was no revenge scene, no shouting, only consequences landing where they belonged, on those responsible. I reclaimed financial control through small but decisive actions, changing passwords, closing old accounts, opening a new one in my own name, and placing the dark green notebook on the shelf. Not as armor anymore, but as proof of what I had survived. I began with a part-time role, then a small project of my own, working during sunlit hours, while the children were at school, when the house was quiet enough for me to hear the pen on paper and my own breathing. In the afternoons, I picked up the kids earlier, walked an extra loop around the neighborhood, learned how to come home without carrying the feeling of being watched or needing to explain why I was late. Change did not arrive through loud promises or dramatic resolve, but through space. A brighter living room, because I opened the curtains every morning, a clear dining table, because tense meetings no longer hovered in my mind, and evenings where I read to my children without constantly checking the clock. I no longer told my story as a defense. I told it as a truth placed where it belonged. I understood that my worth did not require anyone's validation, and that safety was not silence. Safety was knowing how to keep evidence, how to choose action, and how to stop at the right moment. That evening, as I helped my children with their homework while planning for the new responsibilities ahead, Emma looked up from her math problem and made an observation that captured the essence of the change that had taken place. "Mom, you smiled at dinner tonight," my daughter said. "What's so strange about that?" I asked, though I understood exactly what she meant. "Nothing strange," Emma replied thoughtfully. "It's just that lately I could tell something wasn't right. It's nice to see you happy again." I pulled her into a tight hug, feeling grateful for the resilience and awareness children develop when they live alongside parents navigating complex challenges while trying to preserve stability and safety at home. "I'm sorry you had to worry about that, sweetheart," I said softly. "Work got pretty stressful for a while, but it's going to be much better now, I promise." That promise was one I could make with confidence, not because workplaces suddenly became fair or discrimination vanished from corporate life, but because I had learned to recognize my own value and protect it effectively when others chose to ignore or exploit it. I accepted, closed the chapter, and moved forward, carrying no resentment, only clarity and gratitude for not abandoning myself. And if there is one thing I want to leave for this ending, it is this. Freedom does not come when others apologize. Freedom comes when we are brave enough to choose the truth and patient enough to live with it.